Each of us have a filter in our lives. Each of us has something that we filter all our action for. Often in mission speak, this is called a worldview. Something that has shaped us, something that has made who we are. It's through our actions, through our upbringing, and it affects our decisions. It affects the way in which we act and decide things. It's affected the way in which you've come to church this morning. It affects where you've sat in church. These decisions we make, we filter it through so many different things. This is our worldview that we have. And so each of us have these sort of ideas. It shapes what we think we need. It shapes what we buy. It shapes who we are. But for some of us, our filter needs to keep come towards God. Our filter, we need to think about who we are and continually come to Jesus and go, what are you doing? Am I slightly away from what your plan is? And do I need to reset myself, reset that filter in our lives in order to be following your plan and obeying all that you have for us? And no greater time is at the end of the year to be thinking about that and to reset our filter. We've just gone through Christmas, and it's a really great time. And your Christmas tree, I don't know what it looked like. Mine didn't look like this, but sometimes Christmas trees look a bit like this. There is a Christmas tree there. It's a normal-sized Christmas tree. It's not wide, but it's just full of presents. For some of us, there's so many presents, and we think that we don't have enough presents, and we buy more presents and more presents, and more and more, and we think that we just need more. I was talking to someone today, and they're at the shops, and they just go, the shops at the moment at this time of year, just an awful space to be in. There's just so many people going and buying stuff and thinking, oh, I need that, I need that. Advertising in the world goes, oh, you need this, you need that. Simply you have to Google something once, and social media just keeps feeding you. You need more of this, you need more of that. And you're like, get away. You Google something and ads come up, and you're like, you need more of this. You can't get away from this sense in our community where there's just advertising things saying you need more of this, you need more of that. This affects our worldview. This affects the way in which we see the world. We get caught up in this world and we go, oh yeah, I do need that. I do need that. You're right. I need that, more of that. And we get to a moment in our lives where we go, I'm actually not content with what I have. I'm always looking for the next thing. I'm always looking for the next thing to buy, the next thing to do, and the next thing to be. And we move to a space where we're not content. This is a bad space to be in. And so, we've got to reset our filter sometimes, and we've got to actually go to God and go, what have you got for us? How can I be content in all situations? Now, I'm not advocating we move to a Christmas that looks like this, where there's a piddly tree and one single present that everybody gets to share. The idea of being content doesn't mean that you do nothing. It doesn't mean that you sit and you go, okay, this is what I've got. I'm just going to live the rest of my life with what I have. Content doesn't mean comfortable. It's different. You can be content, when you have a lot, and you can be content when you have a little. Being content is the way in which you make those decisions. It's the way in which you actually see things. It's what drives your life. It's this underlying worldview that you have, that shows that you are content in those situations. And that's something you can't see. That's not something you can look and you go, oh, that person is content, because they've got all the stuff. Or you look at someone and you go, that person doesn't have everything, that person is content. It's something that comes deeper. It's something that is more inner, that is actually makes you content. And Jesus is the best example for this. There's an experience in John chapter 4. If you got your Bibles there, I want to encourage you to turn to John chapter 4 from verse 7. We look at this interaction that Jesus has with the Samaritan woman. Yeah, it's an excellent interaction that shows the way in which we are meant to be content. It's one of those things that Jesus is journeying back to Jerusalem. He doesn't go the normal way that Jews normally do. He heads and makes an intentional diversion and heads to this place, this region of Samaria. And so Jesus goes to this well and he intentionally meets this lady at the well. He knows her story. He knows what's happening. And he speaks truth into her situation. So John chapter 4 from verse 7. Soon a Samaritan woman came out to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me if I would give you living water." "But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said. This well is very deep. Where would you go to get this living water? And besides, do you think that you are greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them to eternal life." "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, and I will never be thirsty again. And I won't have to come here to get water." "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You are right. You don't have a husband, for you have 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." "Sir," this woman said, "you must be a prophet." This first interaction is an interesting space, where Jesus, speaks truth, with the Samaritan woman. It's an area where he actually speaks into contentness. He speaks about this idea of living water. It's something that's not tangible. It's something that's not physical. It's not something that you can see, but it's something that you experience through Jesus. And so while the Samaritan woman is looking at her physical needs, looking at those around her, looking and filtering herself from her own worldview, going, my role here is to go and get water. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm thinking about water. And Jesus goes, "No, you need to be thinking about something else. You need to be thinking about something greater. The way in which you're seeing things is wrong. Let me show you a different way." And so in that sense, that Jesus changes her filter. Jesus changes the way in which she sees things. She looks beyond what her circumstance is and calls her to look to eternal things. We continue on in verse 28. It says, "The woman left the water jar beside her well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, 'Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?' So the people came streaming into the village to see him, and meanwhile the disciples were urging Jesus, 'Rabbi, eat something.' But Jesus replied, 'I have a kind of food you know nothing about.' 'Did someone bring him food while we were gone?' the disciples asked each other. Then Jesus explained, 'My nourishment comes from doing the will of God, who sent me from finishing his work. You know the saying, 4 months between planting and harvest. But I say to you, wake up, look around. The fields are already ripe for harvest. The harvesters are paid good wages, and the fruit they harvest is people brought to eternal life. What joy awaits both the planter and the harvester alike. You know the saying, one plants and another harvests. And it's true. I sent you to the harvest where you didn't plant. Others had already done the work, and now you will get to gather the harvest. Many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, "He told me everything I ever did." Nourishment comes from doing the will of God. Our source of contentment is not in things that we have around us. It's not in presents and gift and food. It's not in water or anything like that. Our nourishment and our true contentment is doing what God has called us to. This is the ultimate source of contentment. This should be the filter that we run everything through in our lives. Now, this is the filter from my car. Now, if I go and drive off now without the proper filter in my car, it's not going to last too long. It's a bit filthy, actually. I probably need a new filter. A few of the mechanics are laughing at the back there going, change your filter. But everything, all the air that goes into the engine of my car comes through this very filter. If it's incorrect and if it's wrong, the engine of my car will not run well. It'll start conking out and it will die. You see, the same is with everything in our lives. We look at our world, and our world is just full of problems and issues. The problem and issues is not solved with more money. It's not solved with more stuff. It's not solved with more presents. It's not solved with more seasons that look like Christmas. It's solved with changing the filter in our lives. It's solved with changing our worldview. This is what Jesus does. Jesus grabs you and me and says, I'm going to give you a different filter in your life. I'm going to change your worldview. I'm going to transform you, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. You see, Jesus' interaction here with the woman in the well. Jesus is content with what he has. He's probably thirsty. He's probably hungry. But what he's more hungry and more thirsty for is to see the lives change of this very woman, to see the experience of her worldview and her filter transformed. This should be our very hunger. This should be the way in which we live. This is the will of God. See, Jesus wasn't comfortable when he was on earth. He certainly wasn't comfortable. Sometimes we get being content and comfortable mixed up. Sometimes when we move towards this goal of retirement, it is then we will be content. But what you're actually saying, it's then we will be comfortable. The idea and the actual concept of contentment can be found in anything. You can be content in every situation. There's a passage in Philippians 4, got on the slide there somewhere, where Paul talks about this example of contentment and being content. It says, "For I have learned to be content whatever I have." Verse 12 says, "I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it be with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." This is Paul's example. Paul lived a life, and we see his example of the life in which he lived through all circumstances, when he had lots of things or when he had little. His worldview saw that he could be content in those situations, in whatever we have. And so this is our very example that we follow. And it's not Paul's example. Paul followed the best, Jesus. Paul followed and simply followed the instructions that Jesus had for him. So when will you be content? This is the question I've wrestled with over the last number of years. When will you be content? Since we've been here in Rocky, we've had a smaller house, and we've done it up, and we spent a bit of money on it. And the question was, when we moved into it, is going, is this enough? Am I content if we just leave the house the way it is? And we were, but we wanted to see it better. We wanted to look after it and care for it. But if the house stayed the way it was, we would be content. We would be able to live what God has called us to. But it didn't mean that we didn't put time and effort into it and change it. When we moved to the property that we are now and the house that we are now, we asked that question of going, this is a nicer house. This is a nicer space. Am I doing this out of the need to actually have more? Is it out of this need and this desire that our culture cultivates, that we need to have this? We need to have the bigger shed. We need to have the bigger property. Is it coming from this? Or is it coming out of a sense of this is where God is leading? See, everything we do is filtered through some sort of idea. Every action, whether it's big or small, is filtered through this worldview and this idea that we have. And so in a lot of situations, we've actually got to stop and go, where is this? Is this coming out of the worldview of the world? Which says you never have enough. You need more. You need more. You need more. Next year, you need more. We'll hear over this week, when people talk about next year, you see the news or you see anything, social media will feed you and say, oh, next year you need to have more stuff. Next year, what's your New Year's resolutions? You need to have more. What are you going to do next year in more? And so what are you going to do when you hear those very messages? Do you simply go, oh yeah, I do need more. I do need more stuff. I do need to have that next house. I do need to go on that holiday. I do need to go on these things. Or you stop and you ask the question and go, are these things starting to define who I am? You see, this level of contentment is actually an idea of identity. Who am I? Am I the person that goes on holidays? Am I the person that has that nice house? Am I the person that goes and helps people? Am I the person that gives away all this money? Am I this or that? You see, it starts to creep into this idea of identity, of who you are. The Samaritan woman wrestled with this. She had been moved into a spot in her culture and her community where she was seen as this person who could no longer associate with people. She was seen as a person who had done wrong. And that was who she was. But Jesus came to her and spoke truth and said, no, you don't have to be that. Your identity can be found and discovered in me. It doesn't matter if you have a lot or a little. Doesn't matter if you've done a lot wrong or a little wrong. Your identity can be found and discovered in you. That any decision you make from now on can be filtered through the identity that you have in Jesus. That there can be peace in that space. That you don't have to always strive for something more. It's that identity that shapes who we are. The worldview shapes who we are. We filter everything through that. So I want to encourage you into next year is to filter everything through Jesus. Filter everything in Jesus. Jesus should be the ultimate source of our contentment. That real sense of peace. You know, when we built our new house, you know, we asked the question, God, are you doing this? And we felt an overwhelming sense of peace. And God said, go. Yeah, and it was challenging, and we sought out, and it cost a lot of money. But we ultimately said that God was in this, and so we're going to do it. And we don't know the plans he has in the future. But we know that God was in that. We filtered that through our circumstances. Now, this is not the same for everyone, because we can be content when we have a lot or when we have a little. This is what Paul did. He was content in a lot or a little. His, like Jesus, nourishment comes from doing the will of God. You see, we can ask ourselves, in our own space, as we look towards next year, and often is this question, am I doing the will of God? Now, it's a great question, but the will of God just seems so out of reach. Does anybody feel like the will of God is out of reach? There's a few. I've heard that so many times. They're like, I don't really know what the will of God is in my life. So it often becomes a sense of crippling nature. You see, the will of God is simply doing what God has called us to. The will of God is simply going out and engaging with people and having conversations. I was encouraged by a conversation this morning that over Christmas, that somebody in our church, one of their daughters, who doesn't know Jesus, come and just brought up questions, and they had a conversation with them, and they said, "This is why we go to church. This is what Jesus is doing in our lives." Can I tell you, that is the will of God. They responded to curiosity of people loving Jesus and had a conversation. The will of God doesn't mean you go out and go across the other side of the world and become a missionary. In fact, that could be not the will of God for your life. That could be not God's direction. God could have you right here, right now. But God has called each and every one of us to follow him and be obedient to his call. And if you're finding yourself comfortable, you are likely not doing the will of God. Because being content is actually not being comfortable. Doing the will of God and doing what God has called us to requires sacrifice. We saw Jesus, in a sense, he required sacrifice. It was a sacrifice required. He wasn't comfortable at all times. But he was content in the situation that he was doing what God had called him to. So check your filter. Take a moment this week to reflect and to go, what am I filtering my life through? Is it actually Jesus? Are there some things in my life that I actually need to change? So not only check the filter in your car, which is very important. Jeff Daly will tell you that. But to check it in your own life. The world so easily, continually creeps in and tries to overtake. But allow Jesus to be the one that continually transforms your life. Make a clear decision this next year for Jesus to be your contentment.